I know. You see, somehow the world's gonna get to me and be
He's
so.
so
Well, sorry,
wonderful.
I was about to say, I knew you were going to get that because that's just where my mind goes to every time we count down 5, 4, 3, 2. But we're not here to talk about iCarly. We're here to talk about Succession. I just was where my brain went in that instant. Season 3,
Oh, I get
episode
it.
3, entitled "The Disruption," and disrupting indeed, because Dustin, as a certain Nirvana song that played during this episode was cluing us into.
Oh, that was the disruption. That's funny.
That was the disruption. Indeed.
I didn't even put that together. That's funny.
All that and more on tonight's episode of the Succession Recap.
All right.
All right, we're back. Season 3, episode 3, entitled "The Disruption." Can I already just say, like, I know that we're only 3 episodes in, but like, this is already like the best show of the year overall, just in general, right? Like, I mean,
Best show of the last
question.
3 years.
Well, no, I meant specifically this season, though, like these 3 episodes that we've gotten for the year of 2021.
Oh,
like,
yeah, I think that goes without saying, especially in the drama category.
Yeah,
sure.
for real. But like, argument to be made in the comedy category too.
I
like,
mean, yeah.
What
I mean, it is. It's. I mean, it's the best. No, are you kidding me? I liked Hacks fine, but relax.
Yeah.
No, Success. No, it's 3 episodes in. It's still the best show on TV.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Just like, it didn't even leave.
It's just like, this is already just, it's the continuation of everything that we wanted from season 2, but also just giving us so many more juicy morsels and tidbits in ways that we were just not expecting at all. Like, I guess my whole thing going into season 3 was, I'm like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna get, but what I think we're going to get is straight up war. And that's what we are getting. But again, this is Succession. This is not like the kind of, guns blazing. Oh, they're sitting down in a boardroom just shooting insults back and forth. No, that's not going to do that, because that's what generic TV does. That's what shit like Morning Show and the last couple seasons of House of Cards do. That's not what they do here on this show. What they do here on this show is completely building up the relative insecurities of each of these characters as they get more and more and more enmeshed in their individual just drama and sides, and convinced that they are, and convincing themselves that their hubris will ultimately allow them to get through and brave through this crisis. And I think what this episode proves, as kind of like the cap off to the first third of the season, right? There's only 9 episodes this season. We're already a third of the way through, is that is not at all the case. Like, at all, just in general. Like, as you see, it's kind of amazing, right? Because we talked a lot about like the ending sequence of this episode, right? The conjoining of Kendall and Logan. And I think what it solidifies to me, first and foremost, is that Kendall and Logan, both now being on opposite sides of the aisle, both on opposite sides of the war. I keep thinking back to that amazing poster that they put of the two of them walking down the hallway with everyone kind of spaced out behind them. And it shows that, like, no, neither side is right, neither side is wrong, and neither side is going to get away unscathed, because they're both kind of so mired in their own heaps of hubris that they can't even see the forest for the trees. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Oh, this show is going to end in the apocalypse, I feel like. No, but in all seriousness, yeah, I as a viewer, I still don't know exactly where it could go in terms of like who's going to, quote unquote, win or lose this war. But it's just nonetheless just riveting. It's just a riveting show. And this might be my favorite episode since like the finale of last season. Like the very best. This is a top tier episode for sure.
It's definitely up there. Again, directed by Kathy Yan of Birds and Prey fame.
Good for her.
Making her next big. Good for friggin' her. Like, because the directing for the opening scene, right? It's so funny too, because like the opening scene, right, as it's spacing its way through the restaurant ultimately, and then settling down on Kendall as obviously he's having the interview with the Times reporter. Like, I love how too it's like, the shot as we're following it through, right? First of all, again, I think the show is doing a really good job as far as balancing out, like, kind of not showing out the fact that it was clearly filmed, like, with all these COVID restrictions in place. I think it's doing that really well, because I feel like every other show, it's been pretty obvious. It's like, okay, which scenes they had to shoot with it, within COVID regulations, and which ones they had a little bit more leeway for. But this show's doing a really good job of balancing out those scenes from each other. And I love how, too, when it settles on, like, the close-up of them, right, as Kendall's doing the review, they blur out the background, just in general. And I thought that was a fuck up at first, but after a while, I'm like, no, that's intentionally done, because it's showing, again, that, like, again, just like the regular world does not exist for these types of people. Like, again, like that's one of the biggest things that Jesse Armstrong said going into this season was that the reason why, a couple different reasons, number one being that it would just ruin the escapism of the show, is the fact that he did not want to portray any sort of COVID anything in the show, is because it's like, yeah, COVID didn't exist for rich people, which is 100% true. But like, this is the first instance where I'm like really getting that. It's like, yeah, wow. Like, and I feel like that's in everything that Kendall's doing in this episode, where Kendall, I feel like more so than the last two, is once again just trying to play the relatable guy to everyone, like from the what is it, the something journalist, like the endangered journal, the endangered journalist gala, to the him sneaking in like fist bumping all the guys, to him trying to buddy up with the writers at the end, to him trying to like somehow convince the producers of the show that he's going on at the end to not read out the letter that Shiv had when you know they're going to. It's like, I feel like the dichotomy and like the interest for Kendall this season is the fact that he is constantly at odds with himself, in the sense that he's trying to be everybody's friend and he's trying to be like this relatable hip guy. Yeah. But his actions behind the scenes are showing that now more than ever, like he's been that way since the get-go, right? When he was a little bit more rational minded in the first couple episodes of the show. But now more than ever, he has just gone full on, like just
he's diving in.
Delusional. Yeah. Like delusional.
Yeah, he's like you were saying, like he's trying so hard to not be the rich kid. Like he wants to relate, or like appear to relate to these people in order to like, you know, hypnotize them into liking him, or like believing that he's a better person than his dad, at least. But kind of lost my track right there. But yeah, he's just, I don't even know if he knows what he knows he's doing. Right. Like, but he's just firing on all cylinders. And yeah, like you were saying, like especially the scene near the end when he's talking to the writers, you could see like, yeah, he is seething inside, but like he knows that he needs to like kind of like try to, you know, portray this image of being like a good guy. Right. But the other writers are just like, they could see right through that and be like, this guy's fucking insane. He hasn't had a real friendship ever, I think.
It's kind of
interaction.
Wild. And like, again, it's what happens when you get like one of these characters and one of these people, which is, again, look at, I've heard this, it's funny, this goes all the way back to Harry Potter, which is, again, you want to get the full measure of a person, don't look at how he treats his equals, look at how he treats those inferior to him. And that shows, because it's like, that tells you everything that you need to know about Kendall, where Kendall's sense of codependency, just based on, you know, just the lack of love that he received as a child and the lack of kind of validation that he's got in like every single day of his life, it's showing badly now, more so than ever. And I feel like it all kind of equals, the reason why I think that, like, it's kind of crazy, because I know that I sound like a broken record, because I feel like we've been saying this with every episode up to this point, but the reason why Strong's performance is so fucking good, and why we keep saying, like, give him the Emmy now, is because he does such this incredible balancing act of consistently portraying hot shit, but also like knowing that he is not shit, if that makes any sense. You know,
I know what you mean.
Yeah, and it's all epitomized in that final sequence when obviously you have the reveal of the letter on the talk show. He tries to talk the producer out of it. She clearly like talks around it, but straight up tells him, yeah, we're gonna read the letter on screen. Then he bails on the interview, goes into like whatever the firewall room is, and he just breaks down. And like, this is already coming off a season where like Strong had to portray like defeated Kendall for like an entire 10 episodes, but like somehow like takes all that and ups it in like one scene. Like, I don't know, like what's your thought process like with that final scene with Kendall in this episode?
Well, I still personally empathize with Kendall, no matter the things he says that are bad, or like the things that he's done that are bad. Like I still find him to be like maybe the most like human of the siblings, maybe because of like how much we've seen him go through. So like, yeah. And it was a little too convenient for Shiv to just, you know, write that letter, you know, about his
I've got a theory about that, but I'll come back to that.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about that later. But like, it's just convenient, because in any other case, I don't think they would, like, if he wasn't in trouble or like against the family at this point, would they even care about his mental health? Would they even put that out there publicly? No, they're just trying to shame him. And he apologized for the shitty things he said the previous episode, which he knew was bad, which shows like he has a little bit more of a heart than his siblings do, who fucking insult him as soon as she insulted him as soon as he saw him that episode. Yeah. But maybe rightfully so. But then at the end of that might be my favorite interaction between Shiv and Kendall ever, even over that breakdown scene from last season. But like absolutely, like when she starts talking about, like, she's pretty much parroting what Kendall was saying in like the first season. Whereas like she's claiming that she wants to do all these things that Kendall was, and then Kendall's just staring at her like, "You're me now."
Yeah.
I feel
and he
sorry
keeps saying
for
that.
you.
And now
Yeah,
it's like
you're me
really
now.
starting to sink in more than ever. And what's wild too,
This scene really made it click though.
Yeah. What's wild too is remember what caused Kendall to go off the deep end back in season 1 was when Logan started pushing those articles about him, when Rava contacted him and he's like, "I'm not high," and he repeats it like 5 times to her, and then he goes and hooks up with the meth heads when he gets to Arizona. And like that's what set it off the first time. And so I find it really interesting that now they're looking to use this to weaponize against Kendall. But the interesting thing too, though, is that this time it doesn't necessarily come from like an act of betrayal. It comes from like the direct act. And this is where I kind of wanted to pivot into obviously the big, disruption scene and kind of where that comes from. So Shiv and Kendall obviously have the thing at the endangered journalist ball where she attempts to extend out one last olive branch and then he does the "you're me" thing. Then, obviously, when he infiltrates the building and he sets up the speakers and famously starts playing the Nirvana song when Shiv is trying to make the speech, ultimately, it starts blaring it on the speakers. So, like, my whole thing that I'm going there is, like, so when Shiv obviously does the spit in the, what's it called, the spit in the notebook thing in his office after she finds the crash, and then, obviously, releases the letter. So, do you think that Logan has any part of that, or do you think that's all her and like that Kendall's crossed the line? Because like I guess my whole thing is, as far as like confusion, and this again goes into just the problems with Shiv as a character, is that it's like the siblings have all done some, I would have to assume, some pretty heinous stuff, right? But like the fact that like, okay, so this is Shiv's moment, right? To finally like come in, finally, be a part of the company that she supposedly has wanted for so long, even though she didn't have it for so long. And Kendall comes in and messes that up, right? Is that enough? Because I've been hearing a lot of different views and a lot of different takes on kind of like the reaction where it plays out.
Since it was public, I think this is really what was the cherry on top for her. But I just need to interject though, because like you can call me stupid, you can call me dumb. I missed this maybe. The last time we see him in the office is when that fucking security guard is intimidating him, right?
That's the last time I saw him in the office.
Yeah. How do we like? You said he set up speakers. I didn't see him set up speakers.
So that's the thing. So the only thing was,
how do we know it was Kendall? Honestly,
so I'm glad that you did that, because you're right. I would have missed that had I not been listening to these podcasts. You mentioned in the scene where he's in the lobby where like everyone, like Carolina and Hugo, are down there like trying to stop him. There's a scene where he turns to one of his guys and sends him away to go get something.
That's right.
That's when it is. Yeah.
But also that scene where like Logan's in an office or something, or it might be her office, but like she comes in after she spits into the Kendall's journal, and then he's like, "Sorry, Pinky, you see how bad he is now," or something along the lines of that. And that delivery just made me think, what if he was fucking behind it? Because he didn't look too mad when he was like, he was kind of just reacting when it was happening. Like, it was just like, and again, just doing that. Like, I was like, maybe he has something to do with it. Maybe Kendall didn't do that.
Right.
I don't know.
Wouldn't put it past Logan. Again, Logan has done shady shit like that in order to sabatage his kids before.
Give Shiv the push to like stick Shiv her own brother.
There you go. See, it wouldn't surprise me.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's sort of the behind the scenes, like, kind of maneuvering and like just, self-sabotaging that Logan does to his kids. So it is a very feasible theory. It wouldn't surprise me.
I gotta rewatch that clip when he's going into the building, Kendall. Yeah. And when he's talking, because I gotta double check that. I'm sorry. Yeah. But thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, of course. So, and like I said, so we'll browse around the other character, but like that, I feel like, again, it's like, again, the episode is entitled The Disruption, and it's like, that's the centerpiece just in general of it. Yes. It's like, I feel, and again, it's the linchpin, it's the solidifier in the, okay, there's kind of no going back now. Like, this is war, it's on,
I love that song, too.
It's so good. And like, the way that it started playing, and like, again, like just the layers upon layers upon layers, because this is the genius of the creative team. The irony being that Shiv is making the statement about how, Waystar Royco's anti-sexual harassment tolerance policy when it's around the sex cruise line scandal, and he starts playing Rape Me, right? And the irony being that Cobain wrote that song as a song against rape. So again, just the layers just keep going, just in general. Exactly. It's amazing. It's so good.
as soon as that song started playing, I paused the episode and was shocked, and then started laughing for a minute straight. And then played it again.
I chuckled hard when
I
that
was
came on. I'm
dying
like,
laughing. I was dying. I was like, this show is this is the greatest show of all time.
Greatest show. You're like, we're not even full 3 seasons in. This is already the best show of all time.
This
Fuck
is the best
Sopranos,
show.
fuck Breaking Bad. Fuck
No, not
Thrones,
fuck them, but I just love this show.
This
show is just so great.
Good. It's so good. Like, I just want to talk briefly
Yeah.
about Roman and Connor's reaction, because Roman, I feel Roman doesn't have that much to do this episode. The only real thing, again, is the reaction to the letter, and then the play out between with Logan afterwards, which is Roman, I feel like, has a really interesting reaction where Roman, despite the fact that he's made his stance pretty clear as far as where he stands, he is effectively with Logan. I think it's really interesting that, like, Shiv is all about, like, publishing this letter in order to take him down. And Roman's like, this is, don't you think this is a step too far? You know, and I find that really interesting, given that, like, just my impression of Roman when I first met him, right, in that first episode, I was immediately like, oh, Roman would be the first one to, like, draw the knife and stick it in if he had to, you know. But as time has gone on, it's shown that he is the complete opposite. Like, that is not the case with him at all, just in general, you know. And so, and I love to, like, because this is, I feel like, the first time that I've really paid attention to Kieran Culkin's physical acting, in addition to, like, just his improvisational nature, because this is the way that he crouches backwards and the way that he's constantly, like, trying to, like, almost keep himself contained just in order to, like, you know, contain some source of, like, self-preservation in general. I'm like, dude, like, that felt so emblematic of, like, I'm like, I've done stuff like that before, like, in instances with my family, just where I'm like, I'm trying to keep myself contained. Like, it's next level stuff. And I love too how Roman, I feel like, and emphasize the emphasization on him in this episode is that Roman is still trying to grasp at some sort of, like, idea of the family, because even though he fully admits to Logan afterwards, is like, Logan's like, I don't remember ever taking you fishing, and Roman's like, yeah, you didn't, Connor did, but I had to fucking lie, you know, in order to, like, continue to preserve this bullshit image that we have,
which is so sad that he couldn't think of one memory with his dad.
Happy memory, not one. Just wild stuff.
That was, like, sadly funny when that happened.
For me, it was just like, it was sad, because it's like, again, Roman is kind of I love how the show was, like, briefly clued us into, like, super dark stuff that happened in each of these characters past, like, and Roman, it's like, it's just consistently been clued in, like, with the dog cage and then being sent to, like, the military camp, and it's like all this crazy shit.
What about the fact that he can't have sex?
That too.
Like, he can't perform. Like, there's something going on there too that has more layers to it. And his thing with Jerry, like, his mommy issue. Like, dude, like, I feel a little empathetic more as the episodes keep going, like, for that character and that performance. Like, he's on top of his game. Like, in my opinion, like, Kieran Culkin is the best he's been as this character.
I agree.
For the whole show.
Absolutely. I'm honestly like, when the next set of Emmys come out, I think that's no doubt Strong is winning Best Actor, but I think that there could be a really strong argument this year, more so than 2 years ago now, for Kieran Culkin to win, which I would absolutely be in favor of. But what's it called? I also did want to touch briefly on Connor, even though Connor doesn't have that much to do with this episode. I did find it funny how
I want the sucky.
when Shiv is trying to get them to sign, and Connor was like, why don't you suck? I want you to first suck you, like, my what is it, my tip. I guess the reason why is because I feel like this is the first time that I've ever seen, like, Connor be, like, kind of outwardly cruel with the insult nature, because I feel like when it comes to all the siblings, like, Connor is always, like, on the back burner. Like, I don't think I've heard, like, a single, like, major, like, you know, thing of insult, like, kind of hurled as in order to do damage from him. So this is kind of being, like, the first time I see that from him. It was kind of like a little jarring, but in a good way, you know, because if the trailers are anything to go by, it definitely seems that, like, Connor might be making another move this season, you know?
He might, but it's very curious how they're using him and underusing him this season so far. And I wonder if he's going to have more time. Yeah, it does feel a little bit more deliberate than, like, because he kind of was, like, a jokey character more so in the other seasons. But I hope they do something more with his character. And I recognize, like, a clip that's probably from, like, you know, episode 7 or 8 that we haven't seen yet, but there is going to be a moment where he's yelling at Kendall about something.
That's true.
And that looks very interesting.
That's true.
I'm very interested to see what the context of that is, obviously.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I'm a fan of Alan Ruck. I've always been, and I think he's great on this show, and I can't wait to see what he does.
For me, it's still like kind of crazy, like seeing like again because obviously he's older than he was, but like kind of recognizing him and like the amount of stuff that he was in like kind of prior to Succession, right? Because like my whole thing is for the longest time I like again it's like I didn't necessarily associate Alan Ruck the actor. I always just knew him as Cameron from Ferris Bueller, and then obviously it took a little while for him to like become like Alan Ruck, and now this show has kind of solidified that in general. I also think the irony be that he's supposed to be Logan's oldest son, but in real life he's only like 8 years younger than Brian Cox. He's like 65.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's wild. Like
Alan Ruck is 65.
I think it's 65. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's 65. Like you might have to look.
Great.
Yeah, dude, he was like 30 when he played Cameron. So yeah, that would put him at 65, which is wild.
That's wild.
He looks great for his age.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and the other scene too, if we're like looking a little bit ahead, that I'm really looking forward to is the scene when he has to sit down with Logan going forward. Is like all of the younger three are idiots. I've been your number one from like day one. Even though he's called Kendall number one boy. So I'm interested to see the context behind that scene as well.
Just
in
more
general.
brainwashing and pushing of his
Absolutely.
kids and like manipulation. Yep. He's a bullshit artist. What do you think about the scene? Speaking of that, what do you think about the scene with him and Shiv?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I wanted to talk about that because
where he's like explaining like what he did or didn't know in the cruises.
To me, what that scene says is that he's trying to save face in order to still, at the very least, keep Shiv on his side, right? Because the whole thing, right, is that Shiv obviously is the one who approaches and manages to talk down, the rape victim from last season, right?
Exactly.
And then,
which is also ironic with the use of that song. Too.
Exactly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And the other crazy thing too is the fact that even though like Kendall is, it goes back to the sit down that they all had in the last episode when Kendall's trying to kind of clue them in. Is like, guys, come on, we all knew what was happening here, and Shiv is like still playing face and like still denying it. And so I'm wondering if like Shiv actually does believe that there wasn't anything scandalous going on with the cruises, and Logan knows that, and this might be his attempt to save face with her, because I did genuinely believe that when Kendall said last episode as well, when he's like, he'd be okay with all of us going to jail except maybe you, Shiv. And I don't necessarily know the reason why. Maybe it's just like, the father-daughter relationship as opposed to father-sons. But whatever the case may be, like, I do genuinely believe that, like, Logan does value Shiv in some strange way over the rest of his kids.
Weird.
And that's, again, weird, can't explain it, but like that to me is like the reason why he's going that hard in order to try and like save face with her, because I did find that really interesting, because I'm like, why is a guy like, a guy like Logan, it's interesting. This plays into another thing that I picked up that I was listening to on the podcast, on the two Succession podcasts too, that I was listening to. I'm like, a guy like Logan is not going to do something like that unless it's for two reasons, unless he's being forced to, or unless he needs to save face in order to like gain an ally, because it also kind of reflects obviously when he's, trying to pull punches with the presidential aide that he's talking to in that other scene in the boardroom, right? And so I'm like, look, no one's obviously forcing him to tell Shiv. Obviously, Logan's been in desperation mode since this season began, but that to me told me that it's like, okay, he is trying desperately to make sure that he can maintain Shiv. He's not at all worried about losing Roman, because he knows that, because in some strange way, he knows that Roman kind of has no other options, and he also knows about Roman's emotional attachment to Jerry, so he knows that he can use that to his advantage. But I definitely think that like that was mostly just to appeal to Shiv and keep her on his side. Why? I don't know. But as far as like just the motivation, that would probably be my answer.
Okay. Yeah. I still think he knows more than what he's leading.
Oh, 100%.
Absolutely.
That entire monologue was complete and utter bullshit. Just the fact that
I only get the action points in my email.
It's like, come on, guy.
Sure.
Okay. All right. It's like, okay. But that I was tempted to just start laughing, and I'm like, oh my, and like even Shiv, I'm like, wow, for the amount of bullshit that Shiv has tolerated and believed, I'm like, even the fact that even she's having a hard time buying it, it's just tell you how full of shit he is, just in general, So I did want to talk about everything going on with Greg and Tom, obviously both separately again. So again, it's still to be so sad that like episode 3, this is the first interaction that Tom and Greg have had in person throughout this entire season, and I have a bad feeling that it's going to be very far between the interactions that we get, which is for me like so unsatisfying, because Tom and Greg's relationship and back and forth was one of the highest points of the first 2 seasons. Which is, first off, the thing with Greg and the watch. Like, can we just talk about, like, I feel like the ultimate example of Kendall's hubris and the fact that Kendall is just shooting himself in the foot over and over again is his treatment of Greg since this season started. Like, can we just agree? Like, can we just talk about that for a second? Because I'm like, first off, with the Judasing, and he immediately like spooking Greg into wanting to potentially go and find his own lawyer. Then the thing, and now this thing with the watch, well, obviously the Waystar lawyer, that was its own thing. But now the thing with the watch, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm not going to buy you a $40,000 watch. You know, it's like, oh, I'm not your sugar daddy. And I'm like, at what point are these characters going to realize that Greg is like low-key, like could be a very dangerous threat to them and stop just walking all over him? Because it's like, I don't know. Like, there's also obviously the thing that's like, okay, maybe the stuff that he has in the papers is not as incriminating as we the audience are being led to believe, and that's why what's it called, and that's why like maybe Kendall is not taking as much stock with them as he maybe should be. That could also be a thing, obviously, but like I don't know, I'm just like the whole thing with Greg and like the good tweet bad tweet thing, and then the whole thing I found it really interesting, right, that like last season, right, Kendall was kind of grooming Greg throughout the entire season, and now this season, right, the whole thing is that Tom has always wanted to have this genuine connection with Greg, despite all of his like hampering and like, you know, talking down to him. And in this episode, it's almost like, it's like, oh my God, you want to watch? I'll buy you a watch. It's almost like he's kind of begging Greg to come back over. Like, what do you make of like that whole thing just in general? And
I think Tom realizes he likes Greg more than he thought.
Shiv?
More than he thought. Well, that too, but like more than he thought. Because like, yeah, I mean, the whole watch thing was kind of ridiculous, but also we didn't see like the beforehand where all we hear is Greg say like, oh yeah, he said he's gonna get me a watch, but like we don't know exactly what he said beforehand. But yeah, you know, he could be lying, he could be not. Kendall, I don't know, there's a lot of ambiguous stuff that you have to, you know, interpret for your own. But yeah, more Greg and Tom, please. Tom's whole like, you know, metaphor he made with the wheat fields of like dicks, like that was like made of dicks. Like that was hilarious.
I still can't get over the freaking mints, but as cyanide capsules. And Greg believed that. It's just, it was in the trailer, but I'm like, this is gonna be amazing, and it was when it happened.
Or what about when he puts his hands up when he's like FBI or whatever, CIA or...
And then he's like, here, it's like, let me take you out tonight. It's like, I would, but like, I'm kind of going to this gala with Kendall. It's like, I'm like, does Greg, I'm like, don't like, I know that like, again, the aloofness is part of the charm of Greg, but I'm like, at what point is Greg gonna realize just like kind of the position that he's in general, you know? Because I feel like he's still kind of carrying himself that he doesn't realize that he's walking this very, very thin tightrope line between the two sides. And the other problem too is the fact that Greg has leverage, but only just. And the problem is that if he keeps playing this weird back and forth flip-flop side, I think it's ultimately going to backfire and blow up in his face. You know?
Could be the one ending up going to jail at the end.
Exactly.
Like he could be the one fucked over.
Right.
Like, and everybody else doesn't have to go to jail, but he will.
Right.
And that could be deserved because of how much he's flip-flopping. Like, this is definitely the most weaselly he's ever been on this whole series, this episode. For sure. Like, he's like, oh yeah, fuck Kendall, obviously. Like in the conversation with him and Tom and the new office. Yeah.
Storage closet, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. But the one line I want to bring up about like the watch was when he was at the party and he was talking to like Comfrey, the Dasha character.
Yes.
And he was like, I've always been self-conscious about my wrists. Just the way he said that was great.
What about the line when when the dude is like, I after Kendall tells him that he's not buying him the watch, he's like, I can't afford this, and then he's like, I can't afford this. It's like, dude, that's yours. You already spilled spam on it. It's like, no, it's okay. I shower.
He's like, you still have your patina. You know, he said you have your patina.
That's right, patine. You have your patine on it. It's like, no, I shower.
Right? You can't just force somebody to buy a watch because they put it on. That's so fucking lame.
The argument made that might be the dickish move, the most dickish move that Kendall's pulled this entire show. Like, even more, and this is from the same family that like when Roman freaking like cheated some poor kid in the first episode out of $1 million, like just cause they could, you know.
Oh, that was bad. That's still bad.
So I remember when I watched that and I'm like, what the fuck?
No, but like they needed a scene like that in the pilot to really establish like the ruthlessness of these characters.
Yeah.
And no, if he is responsible for the Nirvana song, that's probably worse.
Yeah.
That's probably worse than the watch.
True.
A little bit.
True.
I mean, but yeah, Greg's just unwillingness to really choose a side at this point, 3 episodes in, is starting to get a little bit frustrating.
Yes.
If this was a lesser show, I'd be annoyed. But the fact that, everything on this show is very particular and very set in stone, and just like Easter eggs kind of like throughout, and it's very well planned. I have more confidence that it's going to end up being like
Right.
a good conclusion with that character. But I'm just been a little bit iffy in the way he's just been so unwilling to choose a side.
Right, especially considering that he's clearly the writer's favorite character. And it's funny, too, because that sentiment that you said towards Greg, I have almost that exact same sentiment towards Naomi, where I'm like, what are they doing with this character? I'm like, well, she said like maybe 5 words since she came back on in the premiere this season. And I'm like, okay, like the connection that was established between her and Kendall in the last season in the Turnhaven episode, I thought was amazing. And I'm like, wow, she like actually could seem like a good fit for him. But in hindsight, I'm like, what purpose does she serve? And I'm like, the writing team on this show is too good to just have like you know a female character be eye candy in this show. I'm like, this is not that type of a show, you know. So it does lead me to assume that like the writers do have something planned for that, but at the same time, it is also, I'm like, we're 3 episodes in. It's like, come on, guys, let's start getting something here at least, you know.
Yeah, but all the we're complaining about them not having certain things in certain episodes, certain motives explained, but maybe they're building to that, and it's fine. Exactly. We got to be and they fill all these episodes have been so rich in detail and like very patient, and we've gotten a lot. So maybe we'll get even more shit that we've been wanting because of how good it's been. So like, I'm not really that worried about the Naomi character. I hope they give her more of like a purpose, like you're saying. But yeah, I don't know if she's bad news at this point. I don't think she is. But yeah, she doesn't annoy me as much as Greg has so far.
Yeah. Well, again, because HBO show, we're outside of Succession, just there, HBO has this tradition of having that one character that's just kind of there in the background, not really doing anything. And then they'll have that moment where that character just comes out of nowhere and does something crazy, shocking. You're like, whoa, what the fuck? Like, a perfect example for me is the character Kennard, who is this little kid who is just kind of mouthing off for the entirety of like the last 2 seasons of The Wire that he's on. And then, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but he ends up being the guy that kills Omar out of nowhere. And you're like, what the fuck? How did this 10-year-old kid, how did this guy take down Omar, like the biggest badass on the show, you know? And like,
yeah, but was that satisfying? The way they did that?
It's one of those moments where it may not have been satisfying in the moment, but in hindsight, you're like, oh, just from a writing standpoint of like how the show would built that up, you're like, oh, there's no other way that Omar could have gone out, because it wouldn't have made sense for Omar to get clipped by a gangster, because Omar was always one step ahead of them. And they always did such a good job of lacing it and making you understand like how Omar was able to outwit them. You know, like he robs an entire fucking shipment of heroin, like right under like this entire gangster's noses in season 4, you know? So it would have to make sense that like the one place that would actually come and be able to get a shot at him is the one place that he would never even think to consider, which is, again, he doesn't think that somebody that young would be a threat. And then again, it just comes to the door, and the kid doesn't even do it for any reason. He just wants to do it because like, oh, I'm the guy that shot Omar, you know, that's the only reason why he does it. And so HBO shows, again, different writing staff, but HBO has like a long history of doing that. Again, I think there's an instance of that on The Sopranos as well.
They do that with The Sopranos, yeah.
They did, yeah, with the Walden character. Yeah, where the Walden character pops up kind of in the last like 3 episodes. And you're like, who is this guy? And then he ends up being the guy that kills Phil. So yeah. HBO does have a long history of that. So again, I don't know whether again there's going to be any actual killing in this show. Who knows? This isn't that type of a show. But you're right. Like, I wouldn't surprise me if they have something.
That reminds me, the fucking security guard who's talking to Kendall.
No, like, that's the same security guard who did the cover up for the season 1 finale.
I'm not liking that.
Crazy.
I'm not liking that.
Crazy. I'm like, it just showed.
Get rid of that fucking storyline.
That was all just there to continue to emphasize that Logan has that one trump card over Kendall. But I'm like, my only thing with that is I'm like, okay, well, why are you using it? Why are you drawing that out? Like, if you want to end logistically, right?
Easy.
Right. Quick and easy.
Boom, and that's not this show's forte. They don't do the easy thing.
Right, exactly. And that's why I'm like, why?
I don't want them to do that.
To emphasize? I don't get it. But especially since they're clearly both going to see Adrian Brody next episode, because they clearly, again, they're definitely probably scared that Brody's going to pull out of the company. He's probably going to be like a major investor. So real quick though, again, before we get into the rest of this episode, because you brought this up to me when we were having one of our conversations, like before anything about season 3 was announced. You mentioned that there could be the odds that somebody maybe like Ryan Gosling could be playing like an Epstein-like character in season 3. Do you think that Adrian Brody is that Epstein-like character.
I fucking hope not. Jesus Christ!
I'm
I don't want to see Adrian Brody
you
as
have a strange habit of. All I'm gonna say is you have a strange habit of being right about again. You called the Yahya Abdul-Mateen.
Oh yeah, I called
being
that.
Dr. Manhattan, Twisted Watchmen without having watched a single episode of the show. So you have a strange habit of being right about.
No, I was watching. I was watching Watchmen.
Oh, you were? Oh, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you spoiled it before I could watch the twist. No.
What happened was I think that you weren't at the same point as me. You were? Okay.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I was watching it week by week. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that was because the whole thing is that like
I called it like 4 episodes.
You called it 4 episodes prior,
yeah.
and then when it happened, I texted you immediately. I'm like, how the fuck did you know? And then you hadn't watched it, and I'm like, oh god damn it. Okay.
Fuck, I couldn't even be like satisfied with my own prediction. But other than that, yeah, I think they might have like an Epstein kind of character on this. If it's Adrian Brody, sure. I just hope they do it in a tasteful way.
They're going to his private island, so just saying. Just saying. That'd be crazy if that was the case.
Like,
if Brody was the guy who was also like the prime guy involved in the cruise line scandal, like
right. If he has anything to do with that's a great idea.
Yup.
Yeah.
Yup.
Uh-huh.
Just
yeah, and we don't really know much about that character anyway.
No, we know nothing. It's the first time
we heard his name like twice. And it's like I want to know. I hope we get a lot of information about that character in the next episode. I really hope we do.
Yeah, same. Mm-hmm. But real quick, moving ahead to Tom, right? So Tom in this episode has some interesting stuff in the sense where, again, I feel like we've gotten very, very minimalistic Tom this season, just in general. It's very strange when you have more Connor than Tom in a season of Succession. But the interesting thing, right, is so you have Tom, right, offering himself up now to essentially, like, kind of take the fall for what he was originally going to have done to him in the season 2 finale, which he was so against, obviously, until Shiv came and begged for his life, essentially, which caused Logan to go with Kendall. So he's offering himself up to, like, essentially, as he says, fall on the sword and essentially do jail time. But then at the end of the episode, he calls his own lawyer. Like, again, like I'm baffled by Tom's decision making. Like, what's going on in his head? As far as what's going on here.
And on top of that, Kendall. What about that scene with him and Kendall?
Amazing.
That was great.
Amazing scene.
And I do believe Kendall in that scene because he's never really had a problem with Tom, and he's always been friendly with him, and he's offering him a spot.
Him and Tom were like buddies in the first season, season 1. Yeah,
like he's Team Kendall on the phone. Remember?
Yep.
Yeah,
Team Kendall.
When he snitched on Greg.
Yep.
But like for sure, like I really hope that team comes together.
Yeah.
Even if Greg isn't involved, I want Tom on Kendall's side because that just makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
And it just feels like it doesn't really make sense for him wanting to like go to jail, but maybe that's going to be explained in the next few episodes.
Right.
But it was very interesting seeing Shiv's like, backing, making that U-turn in the conversation, be like, well, maybe that is a good idea after she was like, no.
Right.
Maybe that is a good idea.
And like that happens in Succession all the time. You have the characters going back and forth all the time, talking around themselves, saying one thing and then going back on it and then vice versa. But what was interesting to me about the interaction with Tom and Shiv in this episode, besides the fact that it's the first time that they've seen each other since the boat, is the fact that if you notice too, this is the first discussion that they've had in this entire show where Shiv is actually actively listening and partaking in a conversation with Tom, which for the most part has not happened at all prior in the show. It's almost always been Tom talking to dead air with Shiv occupied by something else, or Shiv kind of just talking at Tom and Tom kind of just going along with it. And then when he tries to respond, she like immediately cuts him off. Like the level ground between Shiv and Tom has never been there. And the fact that this is really the first instance, and because Tom is still giving her kind of like the cold shoulder, like obviously with the poking back forth, it's like when she says, I love you in the last episode, and he says, oh, do you really? Yeah. And she said, and then now in this episode, with kind of the look on his face, it's almost like, what I'm wondering is if he's just kind of testing the waters and being like, okay, what happens if I do offer myself up as a sacrifice? What are they going to go for? And maybe he's kind of like gauging their reaction, because the one thing that I feel like has been established is that despite the fact that he constantly feels like, last fiddle just in general on the Roys based on his own security and his own desperation of wanting to be Roy, he's not dumb. That's the one thing that I can say. And so that's kind of what made the decision there to like offer himself up a little baffling. But I definitely think that, like, to me, that was more so just Tom gauging, their reactions as far as like what would they say if that was the case. And like Logan and Shiv both almost seemed like a little bit too gleeful on that, and that kind of like told him everything he needed to know, as well as like him like trying to bring Greg in to see his lawyer just in general. I definitely think that, like, even if he doesn't take Kendall up on his offer, he's still trying to aim for Greg. But again, it's going to be interesting to see if Tom does go with Kendall, or if he realizes that like Kendall is just as bad aside, if not worse, than Logan is, because it's like where Logan at the very least still is on top for now. Kendall's just like, again, every single move that Kendall makes just seems to be like out of just pure desperation. And so I'm wondering if Tom's gonna fall victim to that, or if Tom will again out of nowhere manage to be the one that like can make it through all of this, because he is also still vying for the top spot as well.
I guess if he really believes he could fucking make that. Oh, but when he was gonna get fired in the last episode of last season,
right?
So yeah, this show just always keeps me on my toes, man.
Yes,
I don't
indeed.
know. I don't know anybody's move, but like when they start bringing in that security guard, I'm just like,
that's what you're like.
Get
him out of there.
No,
get him out of there. And
then
when he
bullshit
says
out of here.
I see you. It's like
I see you. Like that line too is so like out of 1987.
I'm like, this show is better than this. I'm like, this show is better than this. I'm like, why are you doing this? What was it that, what's it called? I do love, though, again, like how, like, in that scene between Kendall and Tom where they're probing each other, and Tom's like, oh, did you make an immunity deal with DOJ? Like, that's like the part where he's serious, because he knows that if Kendall made that deal, he's fucked, because, again, he was the head of cruises. But I did like in that scene, too. What was the line that Kendall said where, again, it's just like, the next in the constant line of reminders that like Tom will never be a Roy, like the first season in the Argestes episode where Logan straight up says to Shiv is like, wow, you married a man lesser than you or something like that, and then Kendall kind of reemphasizes and brings back that point in this episode where he's like, oh, what, you don't want to be the last eunuch standing in the forest or something that. I'm just like, wow, just like again, like the Roys continuing to shit on Tom and kind of remind him of his place, and he doesn't have Greg to kind of just kind of deflect that onto now anymore. Exactly. So I'm wondering, I'm like, it's finally Tom. I definitely think it's starting to reach a boiling point at the, at this point, And so one more major sequence that I want to talk about is Logan. In addition to the scene with Shiv, but the couple scenes. One, the scene with the presidential aide, where he's trying to obviously again try to essentially appeal to the president. And the aide basically telling him, yeah, that's not going to happen because Waystar is not necessarily benefiting us. This is I scratch your back, you scratch mine type of relationship, and that's not what we're getting. But also the scene where, again, he is consistently trying to repel the FBI over and over and over again, and it just doesn't work. And finally, at the end, when he's like, tell him to fuck off, and then at the end, Jerry's like, yeah, you can't tell them to fuck off. They have a subpoena. It's like,
can they come back tomorrow?
Can they come back tomorrow? That killed me. That was great. But yeah, it's like, to me, it's like Logan has, again, been playing from a source of desperation from the moment this season started, which, again, has been interesting because for the most part, Logan has always been on top. Even, like, in the first season when he had his stroke and was, like, bedridden for half the season. Like, Logan has consistently been playing it from, like, a place of offense, and now he's playing it from a source of defense. And, again, the chickens are coming home to roost because now he's got the FBI in his building and he realizes there's nothing that he could do in order to deflect that. Like, I mean, it's got to be just satisfying considering just what an asshole of a character Logan has been to finally see him get some just desserts. But like, I don't know, what do you think the outcome of this is? Like, does this go anywhere? Is this anything? Is this just like another like kind of pin drop in the slowly filling jar of water?
It may or may not. That's the genius of this show. I do not know personally, but like I do think it's not going to play that big of a part. I think they pretty much spelled it out. It's like, you don't scratch my back, I won't scratch yours, and which is really corrupt, but it's realistic. That's how fucking corporations operate.
I mean, it happened in the first season where he got on the call with the president after the president put him on hold, and then he ends up keeping the president on hold, and then he finally takes the call. And what's it called? The something about the news reporter or something like that. The negative news reports. He's like, "Oh, can you make that go away?"
Oh, the Nazi, the guy who read Mein Kampf.
Yes, that's 4
right. Times
he's like, can you make this go away just in general? So I find it really interesting that it's like, okay, so Logan is usually somebody that has the president's ear, and now because we know why he did it, it's because of just the It's because again Logan's under fire now, and like just every worst way. The bear hug from Stewie and Sandy, which is still hovering over everything. The DC trials, the Cruz scandal, now Kendall. It's like Logan is not in a good position in general, and it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when you consistently hurt him into a place where he has no choice but to attack. The only other thing that I wanted to ask you about, what did you think of like the talk show host just in general and like that whole thing and like this?
It was obviously like a spoof on like people like Amber Ruffin and like Samantha Bee or Jessica Williams from The Daily Show, where it's just like, yeah, that's how these fucking comedians are, where it's just like, yeah, they're joking, but at the expense of like somebody's soul, as bad as he is. But they're just straight up insults, but he's just taking them on the chin.
Yeah,
and I love that moment when he's watching it at the party, and he's like, sorry about the dogs, but he's at the party and they see like the gang signs that he's making. He's like, this is all love. She loves me. This is love. He goes,
that was
I love shit like that. And like just a couple more, like one more Kendall quote was great. Where it's just like where he's on the phone with Sanaa Lathan before he goes into the building, and he's like, we can't, and then she's like, we can't get anything, and he's like, yeah, sure, but really. Like I love Jeremy Strong's like comedic timing.
And
like it's just so perfect.
That's
and natural.
all the characters. We're all the characters who consistently like, oh yeah, legally we know we can do this, but like we're rich, so like we can still get this, right? And they're like, no, you still have to adhere to some level of reality. Again, it's just, I love how this show portrays just how delusional and full of themselves these types of people are.
What about when like when he's in the office right before like that stupid fucking security guard comes, and he's like, 68. You think this is 68 in here? It feels this is like 65.
No,
62.
Like the amount of AC that's like, I'll admit, I've done that a couple times where I'm like, this is I've been like, okay, this is not 68. I check, I'm like, yeah, this is like 70. It like needs to be 2 degrees closer. I'll admit, I've been guilty of that, but I still thought that was fucking hilarious. Like,
no, it killed me. I was just like, he's really that in tune to the temperature. Or he can just.
He's like, I can tell the difference between 70 and 68 degrees. It's only a 68,
65, and then he drops that maybe 62. Definitely, it feels a little cool in here. That killed me.
God. That was great. So it's funny. So I wanted to bring it back to the talk show host real quick. So it's funny.
Yes.
So the comedian's name is Ziwe Fumoda, and the interesting thing, the character that she plays is Sophie Iwobi. But the interesting thing is that she was initially written as a parody of Samantha Bee, but she was reworked by Jesse Armstrong to more so fit the personality after she auditioned for the role. And I will say that one of the interesting things that this season in particular is doing, more so than the last two, is how it's taking shots at the internet and kind of slowly but subtly reminding us that like the internet is quite
evil.
possibly the worst thing that's happened just in general to both people and the entertainment space in general. Much more so people, again, just because it's like, we're constantly suckered in. We're constantly looking for like the next reaction just in general, you know? And like, I love how like this episode in particular, I think is doing a really interesting job of not necessarily focusing on the cancel culture aspect, but rather like how these characters are all kind of like scared and trying to like work their way around the cancel culture, where Kendall, again, part of the brilliance of him in this episode is Kendall seems like he's constantly trying to like, again, he's like, yeah, I'm the guy that's like on your side, but he's just as much a part of the problem and just as much a part of the bourgeoisie culture that like, you know, majority of people online like to criticize and go after, you know, just in general. So I think that's really interesting. I'll admit I'm slightly worried that it might get a little bit forced because let's face it, people in Hollywood are never in touch with this kind of stuff, and it almost always fails every single time they try to do something.
This felt really
like
accurate though.
But this did feel accurate.
Like her show and like what we saw of it, like that definitely felt like a fucking Samantha Bee show or like a type of that show, like and like to a T.
Right.
So I wasn't really bothered by that. It was just so convenient how Shiv's letter comes right when he's at the studio too.
Yeah, talk about timing.
Yeah, talk about timing. And I mean, Shiv's motive for that might be skewed. It might be, just because he could have done that with the Nirvana song, or it could be Logan's hand. I don't know. I still gotta rewatch that clip, but I'm not convinced.
Because you look at Logan's facial reaction during that. He doesn't seem that surprised.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's
what
I'll definitely admit. I keep thinking of that, and him just so like conveniently in her office when sitting down in the office waiting for her, and then he's like, "See what I mean? See what I mean,
Yeah.
Pinky?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
just feels a little too much, and we didn't. I know we didn't see Kendall do it, but like it would have helped if we had some contact. But I feel like that's deliberate. Like
Right.
if the show wanted us to know that Kendall did it right away, they would. So the
Right.
fact that we
Exactly.
don't know just still has me scratching my dusty head.
Right, because this is not a show that likes to play around and you skirt around sort of thing. Like when they want to emphasize something, they mostly get straight to the point. So I definitely think that that's really interesting. Like you definitely did a good job of convincing me. You definitely did a good job of convincing me where I was convinced it was Kendall. And then I'm like, and now you convinced me. I'm like, yeah, that does feel like way more of a Logan move than a Kendall move.
And it also doesn't make sense for Kendall as a character to do that. Like, why would he like just play that song or like do that song when he's trying to like have this image of like, you know, like being a good guy and not sexist.
Right.
But like, it just doesn't make sense to me like that he would do it. But if he did, I wouldn't be completely dumbfounded, but you know, the show did a good job of hiding it if it was him.
Right.
That's all I'm saying.
Only last bit that I have to bring up before we wrap up is why is Nate back? Why is Nate back?
Yeah, right.
Why again? Like of all the
bringing
again, this season has been bringing back all the moments from season 1 that we hated. I'm like, great. Versus Rob is back. It's like great. Now I'm like, great. Now Nate's back. Now all we need is fucking to see Rob Yang again
as a homeless person.
The end of the show. Hopefully.
As a homeless person scrounging for change.
I'll take it if he's homeless because
that's the only way I'll be satisfied if they bring him back. I want him homeless, scrounging for change because he's an asshole.
I just saw that and I'm like, oh,
with
why?
a beard too, like with a beard and everything.
And then when it starts, I'm like, so what? Him and Kendall just know each other now? Like, well, I'm like, why? Like, he was already like one of the 3 worst characters from season 1. Like, it was not quite as bad, but like right up there with Rava and Lawrence. It's like, come on, like, why? Just why? But yeah, that was our recap of Succession, season 3, episode 3.
4.8 out of 5.
4.8 out of 5. I give this. I'm gonna give this. I'll screw it. I'll say 4.9. 4.9. This came pretty damn close. This came pretty damn close to a 5. Yeah.
Despite my issues with Greg and like that's fucking security guard.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And Nate.
And yeah, well, the Nate scene didn't linger on for too long, in my opinion. Yeah, like it was just long enough, and then Kendall came up. That was a nice interaction. That didn't bother me as much, even though that character is a fucking waste of space and the most cliched part of season 1. But yeah, don't bring that character back again.
Please don't. Please don't.
Bring back Eric Bogosian.
Not unless you bring back Eric Bogosian. Exactly. When I'm like, okay, if that's the case, I'll happily take back Eric Bogosian. He's awesome. I love him just in general. So that was it. We'll be back next week for episode 4. Bring on the Brody. That's all that I have to say. Finally. Oh man, I've been waiting since I found out that he was going to be a part of the show for him to be on here. So tune in next week for that. Also, keep tuning into new episodes of the podcast and Talkin' Thrones every week. I've got a couple more top 10 lists that I'm going to roll out before the end of the year as we wrap up another fantastic year. Dustin, where can the good people follow you online?
They can find me on Letterboxd, Dustin Mason. They can find me on Twitter, Duster with 7 R's, and Mr. G Movie Reviews on YouTube.
Yes, indeed. When are you going to start putting stuff on YouTube again? It's been like 3 years.
I don't know when I crawl out of this depression I'm in.
I feel that. We're all in that depression right now.
Yeah, and if Succession does that fucking subplot with the security guard and the bringing back up of that stupid accidental death, I'm going to be mad, and it's going to make me depressed. So other than that, Succession's great.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews on Facebook and Instagram, at Talkin' TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, where I post every single day, twice a day, to give you people the content that it is that you deserve. Also, be sure to click the subscribe button, the like button, leave a comment below, all the things on there, and click the bell next to the subscribe button. That way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. We'll be back next week for episode 4, but in the meantime, watch more fucking movies and 12 Seasons in a Short Film. See you guys next time.